Hi, everyone. Welcome to Communicating in Crisis, sharing research related to COVID-19. Today, we're going to be talking about science communication during the pandemic. We've got two incredible panelists, as well as myself, who will be talking to you about what we've been working on over the past year and some of the lessons we've learned about how to communicate research to decision makers and the public in a time of crisis. So now I will turn it over to Mónica to kick us off.
Thank you, Diana. Hi, everyone. My name is Mónica Feliú-Mójer, and I am the Director of Communications and Science Outreach for Ciencia, Puerto Rico. I also have other roles with iBiology and the Wonder Collaborative at the Science Communication Lab, but I'm going to focus on my work with Ciencia, Puerto Rico in my remarks today. I am a scientist by training and a science communication expert by trade. And overall, my work focuses on using science communication and storytelling to engage underrepresented communities with science and to connect scientists with a wide range of media opportunities to engage those communities. And so during the pandemic, a lot of my work and the work of Ciencia Puerto Rico has been focused on giving scientists the opportunity to communicate their research or simply the science of COVID-19 through a variety of media opportunities. One of them has been connecting scientists with opportunities to write op-eds. Op-eds are a really great way to influence public opinion and to even influence policy. And so a lot of our efforts have been in collaborating with Nuevo Dia, which is the main newspaper, the newspaper of record in Puerto Rico, and giving a variety of scientists, experts in different aspects of research and in public health, the opportunities to write and publish these op-eds in a Nuevo Dia. And I've led this op-ed accelerator of sorts, or this op-ed campaign. And my role has been in coordinating these different scientists, being a liaison between the scientific community and the newspaper, but really I think one of the most important aspects of it has been guiding scientists through the process of writing an op-ed. Writing an op-ed is very different than writing, any piece of scientific communication. And so really helping scientists narrow down what is it that they want to write about, how do they write about it, how do they focus it so it's action oriented, or so that it influences public policy or public opinion. And since March 9th, which is when we started this campaign, we've had 60 scientists publish over 80 articles and op-eds, most of them in El Nuevo Dia. And one of the examples that I want to highlight in terms of the potential for impact of this type of op-ed campaign is the example of Fabiola Cruz Lopez, who is an epidemiologist in Puerto Rico. She wrote the first article of our campaign on March 9th, and this article was focused on what are some of the red flags? What are some of the needs of the public health system in Puerto Rico? And one of the big needs she identified was the need of a solid contact tracing system. Subsequently, Fabiola went on to establish a contact tracing system in her hometown, because at that point in April, there wasn't anything happening island-wide or archipelago-wide in Puerto Rico. And eventually, Fabiola, her model was adapted and adopted by 77 out of 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico, and she's currently leading this contact tracing system in Puerto Rico. And having her voice be so public was really important for her to achieve all of these things. From the lessons that we have learned, we've learned a lot of things about communicating science in crisis, but there's a few things that I want to highlight. First is investing the time and effort in building the media relationships. Ciencia Puerto Rico has a long-standing collaboration with Nuevo Dia. We've been collaborating with them for 15 years. And so we have the relationship with them, which has made this work in the time of crisis a lot easier. The other is investing in giving scientists the tools and the skills that they need to do the type of communication that you want them to do. We do a lot of trainings. As an editor, I guide scientists through the process, and really making sure that people have the skills has been really, really important for our success. And then finally has been knowing the context and the culture of the audience. We're writing, or scientists are writing for predominantly Puerto Rican audiences. And so we're very familiar with the culture and the context and what's going on at the moment, and being able to connect our communication, our op-eds, to what's happening in Puerto Rico has allowed us to increase our impact. Before I end, one of the challenges that's always on my mind is scaling this up. I've been the main editor of these op-eds, and so there's been a lot of work for me. And so thinking about how to scale this up in a sustainable way has been a challenge. And then in terms of the biggest lesson that we've learned has been the importance of keeping an ear on the ground. Again, connecting the communication that we're doing to what's going on in Puerto Rico. So with that, I will end. Thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to you, Diana.
Thanks, Monica. I'm Diana Brazzell. I'm the co-founder and executive editor at Footnote. We are an organization that collaborates with the academic community to increase the impact of their research and expertise by sharing it with a broader audience. So I lead our content team, and we work with scholars and scientists from around the country to translate their ideas and expertise and research into formats that are accessible and engaging for non-academic audiences. We do a lot of op-eds and articles for mainstream media. We also do things like policy briefs and social media campaigns, really anything that's going to be able to reach those audiences outside of a traditional academic audience. We work a lot with social scientists, so a lot of what we've been doing during the pandemic is less focused on urgent public health messages or the science of COVID, and more some of the big picture societal, political, and economic implications of the pandemic. And what we've been seeing is a real interest and hunger around science communication. I think there's a demand from the public and decision makers who are really looking for expert insights to guide all of us during this incredibly challenging time. We've also seen a lot of academics who are, I think, maybe sometimes for the first time, really interested in science communication because they want to help. They want to figure out how they can have an impact. The challenge has been that I would say this has probably been one of the most difficult times to do science communication that I've seen. There's just so much noise. There's so much information and misinformation flying around. And I think the news cycle moves so quickly, and editors and others at media outlets are really just stretched super thin, as we all are. So I think one of the big challenges has just been for the folks we work with, like figuring out how to get their voice heard amidst all of this and kind of find their way in and their sort of place where they can add value. I think to tackle that kind of a challenge, you really have to think about how what you're doing, your existing expertise, connects to what you see going on in the world around you. And Monica already talked about this a bit, but I think really finding the sweet spot in the middle between your work and where you think you can add value to what's going on around you. This means really, I think, thinking creatively about where your expertise fits in. For example, we worked with a data scientist who does network analysis of human social networks, and he was looking around at the conversation around contact tracing and contact tracing apps, and really felt like there was a big piece missing about what contact tracing apps could do if we really brought some ideas of network analysis in. So we did a great piece for him in Wired, kind of bringing in that different perspective that he had to offer. When you're doing this, I really recommend connecting with what's going on around you, but not chasing the news cycle. Academics, in almost all cases, are just not going to be able to move quite as quickly as reporters on here's what happened yesterday. I think a lot of where you can add value is that sort of bigger picture view, kind of that depth of analysis and expertise that sometimes is missing from the news cycle. And also bringing authority to bear. I think that people trust, in some circles, trust scientists a lot and really respect their insights. I I think that sometimes as you're making this connection and kind of finding where to add value, I would think about how you can build on existing expertise, but also existing, data sets you're familiar with, research methods you're familiar with, and really existing skill sets to maybe look at things in a new way. We worked with an economist at USC who studies labor markets, and he was thinking a lot about, people are talking about, well, what are cities going to look like if people don't end up going back into the office after the pandemic is over? And so he used some data sets he was already familiar with, some methods he was already familiar with to kind of do a quick turnaround analysis on this question. And then we did an article based off of that. The last thing I'll say is just, in terms of lessons, is really finding your audience and finding the right channel for reaching them. I think especially for those of you who are trying to speak to local decision makers, sometimes it's not the marquee national news outlet that is the best place for reaching them. It's the local paper, it's the local events that are going on. And we really saw this. We worked with a team at Stanford on an article about promoting gender diversity in the field of health technology. And it was published in Harvard Business Review 2 days after the election. So we were very worried that this was just going to be buried by everything that was going on. But I think what we found is there was a ton of engagement on social media among the communities that are really interested in diversity and inclusion and really focused on these issues. And so by finding and connecting with that audience, that we were able to have a big impact there. I think for me, all of this demonstrates something that we already know from our best practices in science communication, which is that effective research communication is really a dialogue. It's not a monologue. And so it's really about thinking about your expertise, your interests, your values, but also really understanding, as Mónica already said as well, really understanding your audience and what they care about, what they know, what they don't know, where they could really benefit from some information and conversation, and finding that place where you meet in the middle and you can really add value. I think we've seen that in a time of crisis, finding that connection point with your audience is really so important, more important than ever, for really kind of finding a way through in the middle of so much noise and so much chaos. So for me, it's really driven home this fundamental principle of science communication, that it's a dialogue. And with that, I will turn it over to Elyse.
Anna, I'm so pleased to be with you all today, and you couldn't have given me a better intro if you had tried, really focusing on that element of human connection. Hi everyone, my name is Elyse Aurbach. I lead public engagement with the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan. And my team works with faculty, students, and staff to really focus on building meaningful relationships and capacities so that scholars across the university can engage ethically and effectively. During this moment, during COVID-19, one of the strategies that we've leveraged with a lot of our storytelling, and that's worked really well, especially right now when we're all starved for human connection, is to really anchor personal narratives into the communication of data. And what I mean by that is sort of going a level deeper than what you would typically see in something like a news article where you've got a pull quote or two, and really actually surfacing in the words of someone who's impacted by the phenomenon that you're talking about in that piece, what it's like to experience that. So we've done this in a number of different ways. We've tried to give voice to survey results, like with Detroit area residents who are communicating about what they wanted to see from public health officials in response to the early days of the pandemic, all the way to videos like the one that I'm about to show you in just a second, that really centers the voices of people who are impacted by another crisis that is impacting us right now just as much, which is the impact of systemic racism, especially as it relates to things like housing affordability. So with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen for just a moment and play this short clip.
So my name is Bonnie Bilks Jr. and I'm a longtime resident of Ann Arbor. And I've lived most of my young life on the west side of Ann Arbor. The first place we lived was on Main Street, right directly across from the Ann Arbor Community Center, which was the hub of African American activities back in the 60s.
Like many areas of the country, federal housing discrimination and local restrictions prevented many Black people from purchasing and renting homes in Ann Arbor until the 1960s. Because home ownership contributes to wealth, Black Americans have accumulated less wealth than white Americans over the past 50 years.
Though my parents both worked and had okay jobs, they were never able to afford, at that point, buying a house in Ann Arbor. At any point, buying a house in Ann Arbor, as a matter of fact.
So I'll stop there, but you get the idea here where what we're trying to do with these narratives is really showcase and highlight the person who's impacted by whatever it is that the message is pertaining to, and really build the narrative around that data, around that message, around what they have to say about it. We really believe that this storytelling strategy of interweaving personal narrative with ideas about data and research is inherently valuable because it makes the message stickier. It promotes that human connection, it builds a degree of empathy, and it frequently ends up motivating action. So to talk about how we create these types of narratives, I have a couple of observations that I'd like to leave you with. So one is a little bit more about the process of creating these narratives, and this speaks really to both the examples that Mónica and that Diana highlighted about really knowing who you're talking to and building a relationship and a dialogue with them so that you can create a meaningful and sustainable partnership that can achieve common goals. And so in order to do this, we really lean into the idea of being a very, very good partner. And so from the researcher side, that means really thinking carefully and strategically about what the core message is that you're working to articulate and being really transparent with your potential community partner about what that message is and asking them how they want to align with that or not, as it may be. It also means being a really good partner in terms of communicating upfront about what the ask is, checking in with regular status updates, being really clear about what your goals are, and giving that individual as much agency as they feel comfortable with to be able to request changes or contribute to the way that they want their story told. Additionally, from a process perspective, we also find that it's really important to actually do the scripting of the final media piece after, not before, after you've collected the story from the community partner. And the reason that this is important is because then it really enables you to build in that narrative that builds in or weaves in that data in a way that's much more fine-tuned and much more anchored to what it is that the person has to say. And finally, I think the last thing that I would say is that it's this moment in time, y'all. We're all exhausted. We're all on Zoom too many hours a day. So when you do this type of narrative storytelling, it's also really important to keep it short. Just because you're pulling on people's emotions and tugging on people's heartstrings is no excuse at all not to leverage other best practices in science communication. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Diana.
Thank you, Elyse. Thank you, Mónica. For sharing these great lessons and some of the work that you all have been doing. We are looking forward to the live session of this where we can answer questions. I think there's been some great common themes that have come up around understanding your audience, weaving in narratives, making connections, all sorts of things that we're looking forward to talking with you, all of you about in January. Thanks.